Welcome, welcome. Looks like we're live. Pleasure to have you here. What we have on the bench is one of the fabs and one of the PCBAs. So one of the raw PCBs and one of the PCB assemblies that we got from multi-circuits. And the reason why we have this on the bench is because I had a great idea the last time that we were live. Last time we were live, I said, wow, you know what we should do? We should get one of these cheap little microscopes because they're honestly pretty good for how much money they cost. There's been a few people who talked about it in the past, and like to get some really close-up micro views of this board, like that's huge. Like that is super, super cool. So we're just gonna really get a close look here. I've got a checklist of things that I want to evaluate on the board. We're going to be looking at the copper shapes, the solder mask, silkscreen, drills, the plating, the unique plating itself, and a few locations of the board. I'm going to switch over to the assembled PCB, and we're going to be looking at things like placement accuracy and component orientation, how much solder is present, is there too much solder present, and the overall quality of the PCB assembly itself. So let's start our discussion about the PCB quality that we got back from the board house. Let me adjust the microphone a little bit. It's not quite pointed at me. Just gotta mute it for a second. Okay. So let's start diving in to our analysis. Alright, so there's the live feed. Got sort of a picture-in-picture view here. And the reason why is because the resolution of this camera isn't great, but hopefully it's good enough. And then the macro view will show you kind of where we're looking in general on the board as well as where we're zoomed in. So hopefully this view looks good. The first thing that we want to talk about is just the dimensional accuracy of the copper shapes. And that's a difficult thing to properly evaluate, because when we really want to evaluate the accuracy of a copper shape, that means we need to have a frame of reference to accurately measure from. And I just don't have anything even on this order of magnitude for accuracy. We're expecting this to be within 6 mil or 6 thousandths of an inch. And I just don't have a good tool to measure that precisely. A camera is a good way to get kind of a feel for that, but I don't have a gauge or a scale or something to lay down to actually calibrate number of pixels to mils. So we're not really able to evaluate it, but what I can say about the copper accuracy is that it appears as though the copper accuracy is sufficient. It appears that the copper accuracy is good enough that we can't measure any noticeable difference one way or the other. Like we can't, with the measurement tools that we have in the shop, we are unable to measure any sort of error that they may have introduced with any level of accuracy. So we'll just give them a grade of an A. We're doing this on the American scale, the American grade scale. 1, because it's terrible and punishing, and 2, well, gotta have some kind of criteria to rate this on, so it's an A, B, C, D, E, F. There's no E, just F. Apparently it's been too long since I was in school. A, B, C, D, F with pluses and minuses. So like if it's kind of a B but just not quite there, we'll give it a B minus. All right, so that's what we're doing today. We're going to start diving in. So it's a grade of A for the copper shape dimensional accuracy. Now let's start looking at the solder mask itself, and that's this black coating. So in order to do this, I want to get this zoomed in as much as humanly possible. Nope. This thing popped out of its holder. I've been told that the accuracy of these things somehow improves after removing this cover. Wow, yeah, that is a lot better. There must have been like some reflections or something from the light coming back. Well, at any rate, that's wow, this stand is awful. We'll have to come up with something better for that. But I think we should be able to get this zoomed in. Focused. Yeah. Alright, let's get a little closer. So we're starting to actually be able to pick up on the surface texture of this coating. We are really zoomed in. Yeah, that really gives you an appreciation for how zoomed in we are. What even is that? For context, here's what the, well, I mean, I guess you can see on the board, but so this is the tweezers at 100% scale. In the macro image, get that underneath the microscope. That's how big it looks now. So yes, this is quite effective zoom. Let's just get a really nice look at what's going on in there. Speaking of what's going on in there, I don't know what those little balls are. What is that? Can those be removed? Just like some random debris. Yeah, there's like some random debris in this through hole. Looks like some like balled up solder paste and other crud is just like in this. That's weird. Let's check out a different through hole. I know that's not what we're supposed to be looking at right now, but that is bizarre. Yeah, this one too, just a bunch of crud in the through hole. What's going on with that? And like I inspected these when I first got them. I didn't notice anything to that effect. But yeah, pretty consistently, these have just got little solder balls and garbage all over them. Okay, back to the solder mask. So the solder mask, what we're looking for is just the general appearance. Like if we see surface roughness, that would indicate to me that there's a potential for pinholes in the solder mask or small gaps where the solder mask may not truly be protecting the surface. This looks pretty good. Let's check up over here. See, now what is that? Is that a scrape in the solder mask? Let's see if we can find that point. Nope, that's some debris. Okay. Yeah, so you can see a couple traces there running through the solder mask. Again, tip of the tweezers for scale. Just one trace. Must be a plane shape. Wow, there's a second trace. That is nuts how far away those are. Okay. Here's an area with a little more complexity. That looks pretty good. Let's get some shots at an angle. Okay. Yeah. So there you can really see the way that those layers are distributed in there, in each of those through holes. You can see the layers of our PCB and like some cracks. Would appear to be some cracks in the plating in the through holes. I need to consult my handbook on manufacturing defects. I don't know if that's technically a defect. Like, there's many places where the plating does go through, and when we solder that, it's going to bridge those all together. I don't know if that is technically a manufacturing defect off the top of my head, but it certainly doesn't exude confidence. Let's check out one of these oval. That looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So overall, the solder mask appears to be free of pinholes. It appears to be quite good. Come over here and check one more area. It's difficult to get this thing to focus that close. Alright. But yeah, the transition from trace from copper to no copper looks pretty clean. Overall, the solder mask coating looks quite good. I think it's safe to say that there are not any appreciable pinholes in the solder mask, at least none that are game breaking. We'll give him an A. We'll give him an A on that. That's pretty darn good, I'd say. How good? Pretty darn. Let's move on. So then, just in general touch-ups. Let me pull this back a little more. So things like this. When I see this on the board, I'm just like, what the heck is that? There's like this goop just stuck on the board. Like, it's just this sticky. Let me see, I can probably demonstrate. Like, look at that. What is that? Why is this on my board? There's absolutely no excuse for that. Is this like half-cured solder mask? Is this like balled up cat hair with glue? I don't know. I don't really want to know. But I see no excuse for this being delivered to me. Like, they probably have about 5 different solvents they could have used to clean this off, and they just didn't. Furthermore, I inspected a couple of these fabs, and just on a high level, like on a overhead camera level, like from a distance. Whoop. From a distance, there's been a couple of these boards that have some pretty obvious touch-ups. This one doesn't seem to suffer from that. Let's open this fab after assembly. Yeah, this one's got one. Oh, what a perfect example you are. So this fab over here, it's got this big booger. I guess you can't really see that on the macro level. Let's pull out the USB microscope again. Look at that. It's just like someone took a paint pen and just oozed solder mask on top of here. Either that or it's flux that didn't get cleaned. That almost looks like flux. Like they had a hand rework. They didn't bother to clean it up afterwards. Let's investigate that theory. If this dissolves, that'll tell us that it's truly flux. If this does not dissolve, that will tell us that it is truly solder mask. Alright, let's take a look again. Did we eat away at that, or is it just... No, that looks hard and crusty. Let's check between these components. Yeah, that's just gnarly. It's on top of that component. What is that? Like, did something drip conformal coat on this? Like, it didn't come off on the paper at all. If that's flux, I don't know what kind of flux that is. That's bizarre. That's cool. It's our logo. It's really, really big. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. That's not great. But that kind of stuff, this gunk, this is, we'll call it a solder mask touch-up, though. The fact that it's present on top of this, maybe it wasn't a solder mask defect at all. That's interesting. You can see there's no solder mask around that component. Let's check that out on our raw fab. 2.9. Yeah, look at that. The keep out is pretty big. What is that stuff in the pad? Oh, that's not great. What's that? Is that on an internal layer? Is that just like a bunch of crud? Does that suit the plating? It must just been FOD. So I like to call it, foreign objects and debris. That looked conductive though. That looked super conductive. Well, not super conductive, just look conductive. Look at that, it's all gone. There's just little balls of solder paste and just random crap piling in by the pads. I don't know what this factory must have been like, but man, it's just gotta be real dirty. Like, I don't know. That was like, what is that random particulate in the void of the solder, just kind of on the board? It's in by all those pads. It's just everywhere. It's just everywhere. Come in here with the brush and we clean that. And now it's gone. Bizarre. Well, at any rate, well, we had him in a B minus. I'm gonna give him a solid B for touch-ups. I thought that glob was solder paste or solder mask touch-up. Looks like that's some sort of flux that they use for manual rework. That's acceptable. Solder stickage. This is more just something that I noticed while working with the board, and what that is that when I'm soldering this with a soldering iron, like, wow, like I am blown away at how well solder sticks to this solder mask. Like, you come even close to this board with your soldering iron, boom, solder is going to be stuck. Like, no doubt, solder is going to be stuck if you get even close to this solder mask. Like, it's some of the worst I've seen. Like, I've ordered a lot of cheap boards. I've ordered cheap boards from JLC PCB 3 times now, and all of those boards, no issues with solder mask sticking to, or solder sticking to my solder mask needing to be cleaned off. But maybe it's the black color. Maybe it's just ALLPCB's formula of choice. I just really don't like it. We gave that a C. Pretty subjective, but I was not a fan. We'll rate it as such. Durability then. Durability of the coating. Yeah, no, that one gets an A, because in all the cases when I needed to clean, like you saw I was scrubbing on things, I've never had the solder mask like peel off or come away from the board. The adhesion's very good and the durability's good. They've got that dialed in pretty well, so when I'm scrubbing away on this board to scrape the stuck solder off of it, I'm not actually wearing through the coating. It's able to put up with that. But as a last check, let's check the alignment of this solder mask to the pads themselves. And the way that we'll do that is just by thinking about or zooming in on some of these pads. Let's get a little more light in there. And let's just look at the solder mask keep out area around those pads. I think we almost need to get a little closer. Really looking for that texture to come through. No, it's just not coming through for us. Whoop. Oh, sorry about that. I'd tell it to focus, but this is manual action. I've got no one to blame but myself. There we go. Nice and focused. Okay, now we can really take a look. Look at all that crap. There's more of those little balls of crap. That right there. I don't even know what component that's on. I'm just gonna brush. That one looks like it's under the coating, whatever it's under. There, now they're all over the place. I knocked them out of their little hidey hole. Now they're just all over the darn place. What's going on? How do you have so many stray solder balls in your manufacturing facility? Whatever. Alright, so here we found Q25. That means if we go over to the right, we'll find U25. Let's go up to the north. Let's really look at that solder mask keep out. So you can see that there is a nice border on 3 of the 4 sides of those pads. The other side's gotten it pretty close. That might even be called adjacent, but it's okay. Looks like it's definitely keeping out of the pad area. I'd like to see a little bit more of a border. Let's check over on this edge of the board. It's a very similar component over here. So let's check on this SOT23 transistor. Here's R130, U16. Alright, we're almost there. There we are. There's the butte. Okay, so there. Yeah, again, pile of random solder balls. Yeah, that alignment really doesn't look too good. Notice how you can see on, it's actually the same side. On this side, you can clearly see that gap. On the other side, almost no gap. They just kind of whiffed. And it's consistently wrong. When we looked at this on the other side of the board, the error was on the exact same side of the component. Let's check somewhere in the middle. Let's check on this micro. Yep, same deal. Same deal on this pin. The left-hand side, plenty of margins. Their layer alignment's off by, well, almost half. Probably about a third. It's off by about 33% of one pad thickness. So that, I mean, it's not overlapping. They're not putting it on top of the pad. So it could be worse. Could be worse, for sure. Yeah, you can see there, it's definitely outside the pad, because you can see the trace pulling away, and yeah, it's just not quite as much margin as I'd like. Vertical alignment looks about right. Horizontal, it's off. So we'll give that a B. We'll give that a B. Now we're pulling things back just a hair. And we're gonna look at just the solder mask color in general. This little camera is pretty true to color. It's a very bright white. I would call that sufficient in all cases. Come over here, you can look at capacitor symbol. That's very white, very high contrast. And that's why we picked white to go on top of the black. So we'll give that an A. And in general, the quality of it, I'm not a big fan. I don't know if it's printed or what, but there's just a lot of these lines. There's a lot of these lines in the Silkscreen, almost like it was laid down in a bead by a printer. We've got thin lines. It's very, very good. But when we start to have shapes, like in our logo, for example, you can really see that they're printing a bunch of horizontal lines next to each other and that they're not really printing shapes. So, not sure exactly why, but that's what they're doing. That's for sure. They did a pretty good job with our arrows. Pretty good job there. Yeah, it's adequate, if not spectacular. So we'll give that a B minus. Layer alignment of the solder mask on top of the pads. Let's take a look at something like our test point here, where we've got that wrapped all the way around. It's not perfect again on the horizontal, but that's quite good. It's supposed to be symmetrical around those pads. We can look at something like our resistor. That's quite good. It's off a little bit, but definitely close enough. I mean, that's not really a precise layer anyway. It's really there for reference. So it does an adequate job, provides the bounding box for our components, and yeah, I think it does everything it needs to do. We can give that an A. To be honest, I think the layer alignment on their Silkscreen might have been better than their layer alignment on their solder mask, which is bizarre, but yet somehow true. We'll give them an A on that. It's better than it needs to be. Now we're moving on to the drills. And we want to look at the alignment of each drill to the center of each pad. For something like these big heatsink pads, it'll be very difficult for us to measure. Here, the only way I can really help us do this better is if I pull this microscope, make it more vertical to help us get a better frame of reference. That pad is gigantic, so it's going to be a little tricky, but something like these guys might start to notice a little more. It's off center. It's not quite on center. Just optically swagging it, it looks a little off. It's close enough. I mean, so those are, I think, 10 mil traces, assuming they're 100% of their true width. So a 10 mil trace, they might be off by a mil, by a thou. That seems allowable. They were almost off by 5 mils, if that trace width is to be trusted, on the solder mask alignment, but their drill alignment seems to be quite good, at least in that part of the board. Let's take a look over here. Different part of the board, new opportunity for failure. Yep, that is not on center. I mean, that's off by much, much more. We didn't change the zoom, didn't change anything. You can clearly see that this edge of the board is, so it must have been rotationally skewed. Let's take a look at a different quadrant of the board. Yep, so there's definitely less error. So I don't know how this error happened in their fixture, but some pads look quite good, quite centered. Other pads simply do not have the same level of quality. Let's Let's go way up in this corner of the board. Yeah, we'll give them a. And they certainly didn't break through. There was one of these over here. I think it was this guy. They're starting to get pretty close. They're starting to get kind of on the edge for me. That hole in particular is not very well aligned. We'll give them a B. I'm sure they can do better, but it would be very expensive for them to do better. So, what are you gonna do? Consistency via finish is the last thing I wanted to look at. So, there's one thing that I thought I saw. Let's just get this in a micro view. Yeah, see that? You see what I'm seeing there? This is a great picture. This picture shows 3 different vias that appear different, 3 different ways. This one is completely untented. This one is completely tented. This one's kinda sorta tented. Right next to each other on the board, in the same plane, 3 vias with 3 different levels of finish. Like across a board, I could see there being more variation. That almost just seems like an adhesion issue. So this would be a fully tented via. This is also a fully tented via. But then there's like these right next to it, completely untented. And tenting is all about having the solder mask go over a via or not. I would like to think they would be able to achieve a higher level of consistency. Just looking at the board on a high level, it looks like on the board that's not their solder sample, they did have a much higher level of consistency. If we hop over to this board here, this is more in line with what I would expect. Very consistent finish. It's not all perfect, but it's all very similar in the same region of the board. If we hop over here, gotta avoid components now when I'm finding a spot for the microscope. Still quite similar finish. Very different part of the board. All the way over on the other corner of the board. Very similar. This board's kind of a hot mess. The solder sample they gave us is not very consistent. So they're inconsistently consistent. Not sure how to rate that on our scale. I'll call it a B. Now let's take a moment to look at the pads themselves. There's a couple defects we might see in the gold plating itself. The electroless nickel immersion gold surface finish that we asked for. In general, the gold plating looks very consistent. I'm not seeing any silver shine through, which is good. Yeah, that doesn't have the highest degree of consistency, but that could just be surface stuff too. That could be me messing around with. Let's put some. Yeah, that's pretty consistent. The streakiness was just from the wash step or something. Yeah, that looks quite good. And we saw that one issue when we put the camera at an angle and looked inside. One of those videos, like the rips or the tears in the inside plating on the vias and on the through holes. All the solder balls everywhere are terrible. But as far as things like the black pad defect and just overall surface finish, it looks very smooth, very consistent. Let's see if we can really zoom in on one of these bigger pads over here, just to really get an idea of that surface finish. Alright, let's see what I can do with human zoom. Alright. Alright. Wow. Look at that level of detail. Yeah, so you can, wow, it almost looks like we can see the individual crystals. That is quite zoomed in. I'm really impressed with the optics in this thing. And it costs 15-20 bucks, and we can get this good of a picture of what's going on with our plating. That's incredible. Speaking of what's going on with our plating, looks like a scratch. Yes, that's one bristle on my brush. Yeah, not quite sure. Let's hop over to the next pad. Yeah, it looks quite good. I'm not seeing any sort of splotchiness, or I'd be looking for like some black speckles or gray speckles that would indicate some manufacturing process issues. That just looks like some flux or something. Doesn't look like anything much of anything. No, that just cleaned off. Yeah. So yeah, the surface finish looks really quite good. Really quite good. So we'll give them an A on black pad overall surface finish. Let's take this back out. Let's zoom out again. And just take a look at the potential for overplating. There's the most susceptible place for overplating is right here, because this is the finest pitch component that we asked them to etch. This is half a millimeter pin spacing, and that looks quite good. I don't see any gold like reaching out towards the other components or anything like that. That looks very well controlled. So this is what I would expect. There's an Enig surface finish has been around for a very long time. I would expect that their process control would be very good. So wonderful. Looks like they've done, look at the through holes, a B, because of like the fissures that appear inside of that hole. They're big enough fissures that I can see them with my eye. And that means they're too big, in my opinion. It seems like the opportunity for a via to not truly conduct, and this is a multi-layer board, so our vias need to work, and that it just doesn't give me the warm fuzzies, so we're giving it a B. In this case, I am the judge, and I don't really need to explain myself. I can just say I don't like it, and therefore it is a B. I'm mad with power, but that's okay. Alright. Well, that's all of our PCB checks. Let's head over to the PCBA and make some grading remarks. So we want to look for things like placement accuracy. Let's actually trade places with this. I'll pull this off. Pull that off the bench. Get these out of the way. We'll scoot this over. Okay, so placement accuracy. Let's look at something like this U23. See if we can get it fully in frame. Okay, so it looks like that was very well centered on the pads. Let's check out something like this diode. That also looks quite good. That resistor is placed quite well. This transistor in a similar point looks good. Big ol' resistor looks great. Let's check out these components. These are the SI Labs isolators. Yeah, that. Okay, so let's look. That pin's on there on the inside. Line up well. Okay, so that one's placed right. No, that's good. That's really quite centered. How's that looking in this dimension? It's looking centered in this dimension as well. It's a little off-center, but that's not a defect. Quite familiar with the definition of a solder defect for SMT parts, so that's not it. Here we've got quite good. Quite good. Now this is interesting because those solder fillets look very different from some of the other solder fillets I've seen. Like these, for example, they look quite, for lack of a better word, brittle. They look very crystalline. And that would lead me to believe that this was made with lead-free solder. But then I go and I look at a pad like this, and that looks, see, like that resistor, it looks super, just kind of nasty. Like, doesn't look like it flowed well. It just looks bad. Then you look at this component lead and everything's shiny and great, and that almost makes me feel like whether that component was hand soldered in, they switched solder paste halfway through my board, or it's all leaded solder and just half of it's cold solder joints. And if half of the board is just cold solder joints, that is going to be really bad news for the reliability of these boards. I don't know how I could possibly get to this stage without knowing what type of solder paste they were going to use. but man, it looks like it flowed well and it's just lead-free paste. So maybe it's just those couple pads throwing me off. I'll have to double check. I assumed it would be lead-free. That's just what I assumed. Yeah. No, the placement accuracy is quite good. I'm very happy with their work in that regard. So, props to their pick and place programmers for at ALLPCB. Did a fabulous job. And they had the reflow profile set up really well. Like, these components weren't drifting around or being tugged around. I mean, when you look at the types of solder defects you could see, I mean, these guys just got a pick and place export raw out of our EDA tool, and we asked them to go nuts, and they did. They did a great job. So, A for component placement accuracy, and also an A for orientation. I did this off camera, but I checked, like, for example, the diode here. Just checked that the stripe was in the right location in all cases. There's a couple of these. They're very consistent on every polarized component. For something like these resistors, you know, I don't know who placed these that way. Right? They probably just took the component placement orientation from my pick and place file and just batch copy pasted. And the reason why some of these aren't the same way, even though they're the same part right next to each other, is probably just because I had the part and I rotated it in the schematic tool, and now here we are. So normally I'd like to see those all going the same way, but that might be on me. I might have actually done that in my files, because these are very consistently back to back, and I don't know why their programmer would go through the effort of rotating these 180 degrees. I guess in that case they didn't. So, yeah. If that was an automated export, I would expect it to be consistent, but since there's a human factor in making it happen, that means that I probably blew away any sort of consistency we could expect to see. So that looks good. From a solder perspective, insufficient solder is the next thing on our list. So you'd be looking at the heel and toe fillets of these components and trying to discern whether or not there was sufficient solder. Let me see if I can. Here's a micro, or an IC we can potentially get a nice close view of. Alright, let's zoom. Get a little more light on that bad boy. Apparently not. Wow. Alright, let's back off the zoom a little. Whoa, I am off in the weeds, man. Off in the weeds. Alright, so let's swing this over. There we go. There's a solder fillet. Let's see if we can get this thing to focus. That's not focus. That's not focused. We need to get closer. Yes, we need to get closer. That looks very good. That fillet looks quite good. Looks like it flowed well. Sorry for the shaking. It's very difficult to hold the camera that still. It is really zoomed in. Now let's see if we can get an idea of what's going on with the heel fillet as well. Yeah, it looks like solder wicked all the way around the pad, and it's got a nice heel fillet. It's difficult to see. I need more light in this microscope to really get a good picture of that, but based on what I can see from here, unless that is pulling away from the lead, that looks good. Maybe a little bit, just a touch too much solder, but that's okay. Let's see if we can get the same picture on this component over here. Yeah, so there we can see a very good picture of the heel fillet. Quite excellent. Toe fillet, also good. Yeah, very good job. I could do that for a lot more components, but I spot checked a couple of them. I expect that their execution will be very consistent on that. If they trimmed the aperture and chose a thickness of the solder paste stencil that was appropriate for those two components, I expect they did it for all of them. Like this resistor, this giant resistor also looks adequate. This SMT resistor is massive. That looks quite good. So they can accommodate large components and small components. That they did a good job there. Tombstoning, absolutely splendid. No tombstoned resistors. I'm a little shocked, to be honest, because I didn't. And these are pretty big parts. They're all 603 or bigger if they needed to be. But it's definitely possible to make a board that would make it difficult to make resistors not tombstone. Like, it's really easy to screw that up by having an imbalanced thermal load on two sides of a component. Like if I tied one end of a component to a plane and the other end of a component to trace, and when you reflow that, one side will stay molten for much longer than the other, and as the one side of a component hardens, it can actually take that and like tip it up. And that's what a tombstone resistor is. It's like there's the molten side and the cooling side, and the cooling side can just pull the component right off the board, and it'll just be sticking straight up. And that's a tombstone resistor. Now, I'm very happy with the fact that there's no tombstone resistors here. So again, mad props to their assembly team. This looks pretty darn good. So the PCB, I've had more gripes with the PCB quality than I have with the assembly service quality so far, which is not what I would expect. And there was a little bit of back and forth, but honestly they were pretty autonomous. I didn't really need to manage them too much. They just took my inputs and flew with them. And once they actually started working on them, there was about 2 or 3 weeks where they just didn't make any progress. But once we got past that, they were cruising along at a pretty good clip. Yeah, so there's a couple of these that are going to be difficult to try to quantify just to keep this moving. The next couple things I wanted to check were components floating above the PCB or components placed. Now, let's see if I can get this in a decent picture. So, like when we look at this diode from the side, get this zoomed in. Yeah. So when we look at this diode from the side, this was a terrible example because this is a J-lead component. And J-lead components have leads that wrap underneath the body of the part. So let's use this capacitor instead. So when we look at these two components, that resistor and that capacitor, you see how that resistor is kind of floating above the board? That's not ideal. That's not really what you'd want. In this case, it looks like that is a slightly thermally imbalanced solder joint. Like that could have been a tombstone if I did a little bit worse in my layout and thermal balancing of the two sides of that component. But I did okay. I didn't do great. I did okay. So it just tugged a little bit, but then the other side hardened and it kept it from tombstoning. Let's not get distracted by that. Let's look at this capacitor. And in this case, you can see that both leads of that component are very, very close to the board. Wow, that is really washed out. Let's tone back the light a little bit. You can see that both leads are very close to the board, and that's what I'd expect to see. If there was something like a layer of solder mask, for example, getting in the way there, let's zoom in a bit. Oh boy. Apologies for taking so long to focus this thing. New piece of equipment. Okay, so there we are. Alright. That looks very good. Let's check out this component over here. Solder ball on top of the part. So they've got like solder raining down on top of this board. No wonder. Look at that. Yeah, I need to. I've got to mark some points for that. It's like they're just raining solder balls all over this thing before they reflow it. How can you be that sloppy? How do you drop that much solder paste? The mind boggles. Mind boggles. Look at that, on top of that resistor too. All over the place. Wow. Let's check out some of these components. See if we can find any solder balls on top of these. I mean, keep in mind, this was the first time I unwrapped this. Like, I was not soldering near this component. I intentionally left it on top of their packing material so that I would know that this wasn't picking up junk from my bench. This is just honestly how dirty the part was. Like how, look at that. Over here too. Look at that piece of garbage. Piece of solder on top of the component. How? How? How do you do that? This is our baseline, right? We haven't used a lot of manufacturing services. I've used a fair amount of manufacturing services, but not like the cut rate, super cheap Chinese ones. That looks weird. Is that a piece of fuzz? Or is that a crack in this ferrite bead? Piece of fuzz. Yeah. Interesting. So components floating above the PCB, we kind of got the last two things on our list in one go. Components floating above the PCB, we'll give all PCB an A in that regard as well. And overall quality, I've got to give them a C. Like, that's just an unacceptable quantity of foreign objects and debris. Like, that is completely unacceptable. Like, I don't know why they would think that would be acceptable, but that is not acceptable at all. Like, at all. So we're gonna have a video come out in a couple weeks here, and we're gonna go through our whole story and everything that we've encountered with ALLPCB, the whole experience, every interaction that we've had with them. We really want to detail that and describe it well for you guys, just so you can make an informed decision, right? If you're thinking about ordering something from ALLPCB, if you're thinking about giving them your money, I want you to know what you're getting in for before you do that. This was just a bit of fun. We had to dive in. We're actually working on that video right now, and I was just reflecting on my thoughts on the board, and I was like, well, I don't really know what my thoughts on the board are yet, because I haven't set aside the time to really investigate the board in detail. So this streams in okay quality. It was recorded in a higher quality, and we'll end up putting some of this footage into that video. But we'll also be capturing the rest of our experience with ALLPCB as a company and as an assembler. So hope you enjoyed this stream. We'll just stay online here for a bit and chat a little bit more. Yeah. If you got any questions as we're wrapping up about PCB assembly or quality that we saw or any of the defects, just shoot that in the comments. But as a closing remark, one thing that I'm really excited about, we've been planning this for a couple weeks now, but we're just about ready to kick off our design sponsorship, the contest where you'll submit your project ideas. We teased this in a live stream, oh boy, way too long ago, but we've been planning this for a while. It's been finally coming up, and we're just about ready to launch it. So you can look forward to a trailer coming out giving you more details on specifically what to do. But I'll tell you right now, if you're looking to get in on that, start collecting some thoughts for project ideas that you might want some help with, and just put some thought on what parts you think you can do yourself and what parts you might need a little bit of mentorship or guidance on. And the goal is that, you know, if we're trying to really do a project for you or step by step with you, I'm not going to have enough time for that. But if there's a couple key parts of a project where we can really enhance the learning experience for you, that's what we're trying to do. So if there's something where you're thinking about doing a project and it's just a little out of reach for you right now, start pulling together a video if you can and describing it, or pulling together a forum post, or just crafting an email that you can send to us. We can work through that. But start thinking about what project you might want to work together on, and you might win. You might win. I'm not sure exactly how long the contest will be running for. We want to get at least 25 responses. Typically we get a pretty low response rate when we try to do something like this, so just going to wait long enough to collect at least 25 responses, and at that point we'll pick some winners. If we get the responses really quick and we get an unexpected flood of submittals, what we'll do is we'll just discern those as they come, make a decision as we go, and hopefully we can target it so we're outreaching enough individuals. Right now we're planning on 2 winners for the contest, but if we get 300 submittals, maybe we'll need to make a couple more winners. So thanks for tuning in this morning. Thanks for coming along with us as we captured some footage and gathered our thoughts on the quality of these fabs and the assembly. And we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.